I think Monkey D. Dragon is one of the most compelling, unique, and genuinely good-hearted characters in all of One Piece. And here's why. Hi, I'm Ginny, and I've been a fan of One Piece since 2013. Over the past couple years, I got really caught up in work and life, and I fell behind on the manga, but I just recently caught up on the latest chapters, and something has been making me so insane that I had to create a YouTube channel just so that I could rant to you guys about it. And that something is Monkey D. Dragon. Now, Dragon is a character that has fascinated me ever since I first started reading One Piece. Despite how little we know about him and how rarely we see him, his character just has so much potential. We know that he's the son of one of the most famous and lauded Marines, yet he's the head of a revolutionary army whose entire goal is to overthrow the faction that the Marines serve. We know that he's the father of Monkey D. Luffy, our beloved main character, but we've never seen them interact, and Luffy doesn't even find out that Dragon is his father until he's 17 years old. Dragon is theoretically the most dangerous criminal and the most wanted man in the One Piece world, but we've never even seen him fight. On the surface, these things might seem like contradictions, but in my opinion, they're actually pieces of the puzzle that make Dragon as unique and compelling of a character as he is. I've always believed that there was more to love about Dragon than many of One Piece's readers realized, and the recent chapters have really vindicated this belief for me because there's so much fascinating information to mine about who Dragon is and what makes him special in just a handful of panels that he's appeared in during the God Valley flashback. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, and if anything I say here sounds familiar, it's probably because you saw me talking about it on my Tumblr blog, where I have been going insane about Dragon for like the past 3 weeks. So the very first thing that I noticed about Dragon when reading his introduction in the God Valley flashback is that, unlike, say, Luffy or Ace, it seems like Dragon was not necessarily a naturally rebellious or contrary person from birth. He became a Marine like his father wanted him to be, after all, and while he immediately notices the immorality of the training exercise he's being asked to complete and questions its validity, he still attempts to follow his superior's orders up until the moment that he realizes that he can't tolerate what he's being asked to do. To me, this feels very different from Luffy, who always rejected Garp's attempts to make him a Marine, not out of a moral dispute, but because he wanted to be a pirate and to be free to do what he wanted without any sort of professional responsibility or oversight. Luffy just wants to have fun and protect his friends, and the universe is very lucky that this just so happens to result in him liberating entire countries. But that's not Luffy's main goal. On the other hand, Dragon's motivations are purely moral. He gets no joy out of any of this, and he has no personal connection to God Valley or its inhabitants at all. It's not like he was a teenage rebel trying to stick it to his dad, and he wasn't an agent of chaos who habitually shoots celestial dragons with tranquilizer darts. I think he probably would have been perfectly happy to fulfill his dad's expectations and be the best Marine he could be before he realized what doing so entailed. And in a way, this has made him a lot more likable to me because he wasn't predisposed to question or dislike the Marine system. If anything, quite the opposite. But his moral core was so strong that the very moment he discovered the truth, he threw everything aside. His job, his orders, his father's desires, and gave all he had to mitigate the situation. What makes his actions seem even more selfless to me is the second most compelling thing that is confirmed about Dragon during this flashback, which is that he doesn't really seem to like violence. At all. One Piece is a shonen manga, and while it might lean more towards adventure than some other shonen, it can still fall under the umbrella of battle manga depending on who you're asking. Regardless of how you personally characterize it, violence and months-long battle scenes are commonplace in One Piece, like in many shonen. This is totally fine, it's just part of the genre, but it does mean it's super rare to see a character have a viscerally negative physical reaction to violence like Dragon does during the God Valley incident. especially a character who's clearly being positioned as a badass, well-respected figure in the story. You could write off Dragon's reaction to the blood and carnage around him as him being young, but he's the same age here that Luffy was at the beginning of the series. And what's fascinating to me is that despite now being the leader of a literal army, I actually don't think that Dragon has changed all that much now from the nauseated teenager that he was back then. The story has made it pretty clear, even before this, that Dragon does not like violence. In Kuma's flashback, Vegapunk is surprised to hear that Dragon is starting an army because he knows that Dragon hates war. You can also see his hatred of violence in his blinding rage upon finding Sabo near dead back in Goa Kingdom, and more recently in his reaction to Cobra's death. In fact, Dragon's rather extreme reaction to Cobra's supposed murder by Sabo has always struck me as a little odd. The Revolutionary Army is, a revolutionary army. While it's not their main goal, you can imagine that a king or two might die in the process of achieving their ideals. Yet, Dragon was clearly shaken and disturbed by the idea that his second-in-command might have killed someone who was a decent guy and not a combatant. This all makes me think that Dragon is someone who, in general, has a much stronger abhorrence to violence than most other characters in the series. Likely even more so than Sabo himself, Sabo who was willing to take the fall for the murder of Cobra if it meant helping their cause. Pre-timeskip, we even see Dragon scold his subordinates for celebrating a military victory. It's clear that from his perspective, regardless of whether it was a win from their side, having to fight at all was a tragedy. In Dragon's mind, even when war is absolutely necessary, it should not be celebrated or taken lightly. And God, how damaged must the world be to make a man that sickened by violence and devoted to peace decide that his only option is to create a goddamn army? But really, that is what makes me like Dragon so much. In a world filled with violence, he's an extremely non-violent man. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that Monkey D. Dragon is not a fighter. Hear me out. That's not a dig, it's a compliment. There's actually something extremely powerful to me about how not powerful Dragon is portrayed as in the God Valley flashback. He doesn't have a devil fruit yet, he hasn't used any haki. Hell, he hasn't fought back at all besides tranquilizing a celestial dragon from behind. He knows he can't free all the slaves or stop the hunt or stand up to the holy knights. He can only save 2 babies, and even then, he's nearly killed in the process and only survives out of sheer luck rather than strength or skill, and he ends up losing one of them. The purpose of showing Dragon here is not to reveal how badass he is, it's to show that even as a 17-year-old low-ranking Marine who gets nauseous at the sight of violence, he was ready and willing to question the system around him. And honestly, that's a more impressive feat to me than any show of physical strength. Speaking of physical strength, we haven't seen many, or actually any, feats of physical strength from Dragon in the series so far. And to be honest, I think that that is intentional. I interpret Dragon as a character who's actually quite similar to Robin in the sense that he can fight, but only because he has to in order to protect his friends and his cause. His real value comes from his intelligence, his leadership, and his steadfast moral core. I think that if he never had to fight another day in his life, he'd probably be more than happy. By stark contrast, Dragon's father is a man whose reputation revolves entirely around his physical strength. Garp's nickname is literally the Fist. His whole thing is just punching people really, really hard. Yet Garp is the one who has remained subservient to a system he doesn't fully believe in for 50 years, while his son was party to one single act of governmental violence as a teenager and immediately defected and thought that dying might be what he deserves for the sin of his extremely temporary involvement in any of it. But the thing is, Dragon didn't die. He kept going, he kept moving, kept saving people. First it was that little red-haired baby, then it was entire countries, and now he's starving out the monsters at the very, very top. It's not about how hard he can punch his enemies, it's about political consciousness, it's about caring for people with no personal connection to you, it's about identifying the true rot at the heart of the world and being unafraid to question it, even if it might get you killed. That's what makes Dragon one of the strongest characters in all of One Piece. I'm going to leave you with one last panel from the God Valley flashback that has struck a major chord with me. If I don't do something, I'm going to collapse under the weight of it all. This really does encapsulate to me who the Revolutionary Army is as a faction and why they're so important to me. They're not in it for money or adventure or fun. They're in it because they've seen the injustice and cruelty embedded into the fabric of society, and if they stand by and do nothing, it will kill them. They're a group of people for whom inaction is more painful than the extreme danger that going against the highest authorities in the world entails. They fight for a better future because the alternative is suffocating under the unbearable weight of their present reality. I don't think becoming a revolutionary was even a decision in Dragon's mind. For him, it was the only sane option he could find in an insane world. And I love that. I love that in a society as dark and corrupt as One Piece's, there are still men like him that are willing to stand up and challenge the very systems that society is built on, even if it means breaking their own pacifist values. I truly believe that the world, both the One Piece world and our own, could use more men like Monkey D. Dragon. I believe that Dragon is a reminder to us all that no matter who your parents are or what beliefs you were raised with, and no matter how much pain and violence you see around you, you can still become something better. You can still do good in the world. I can't even properly express how excited I am to watch this character's story continue to unfold and to learn more about him through the remainder of the series. And I'm curious what you guys think and how you think his story is going to go. Do you think he's going to end up as one of the strongest fighters in the series, or do you think he's going to be more of a support character who is based around like leadership, as opposed to being the one who is, you know, making the final blow on the big villains in the series? Let me know what you think. Thanks so much for watching this video, and if you liked what you saw, please leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe to support a new creator. I already have some ideas for other videos. I'd really like to make a video on Shamrock, actually, because he's another character who I think is really, really interesting and has a lot of potential. If you have any suggestions for topics or things you'd like to see discussed, let me know. And thank you again for watching. Bye.